budget work session. So. Work session for the 2016 budget for St. Mary's County Public Schools is now in session.
And with your permission, I'd just like to start us off. So good morning to all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for coordinating a work session to talk about the budget that we presented on Friday of last week. Again, I have three very brief slides. They're the same slides that I brought before you last week on Friday. Our budget priorities for the 2016 school year are opening Captain Walter Francis Duke Elementary School, originally forecast to be about $3.3 million in startup. We're going to do it for two next year, and in doing that, we're going to be looking at reallocating positions from other parts in the system to the new school. We've got an incremental healthcare cost increase set aside of about $1 million, and then $4 million set aside for negotiations. Overall, if we're asking for a snapshot of what we're looking at, this year we have an unrestricted revenue budget of about $195 million. Next year, we're looking at an unrestricted budget request of $201 million. We are looking to our local funding agents and requesting a $7.1 million increase over the allocation from last year, and that's a $7.5 million increase over maintenance of effort, because actually under the funding agreement, from the way money was dispersed last year, they actually can decrease by about $300,000 the amount of funding for us this year. So it is a very heavy request. We recognize the fiscal climate that we are in St. Mary's County. That being said, we believe that the three priorities that we bring forth definitely necessitate additional funding and would warrant consideration by our county commissioners. Today, we'll be walking through the budget. I am just seconds away from handing this off to Ms. Tammy McCourt so that she might really talk through each one of the categories, talk specifically about healthcare and the opening of Duke and how we intend to do that. But that gives a breakout by category of the ups and downs. Please know that when we talk about the 2016 recommended budget, each one of those totals reflects our anticipated expense and with the anticipated negotiation expenses built directly in that. It's not something that we set aside. We built it directly in. Ultimately, when we're talking about Duke Elementary School, we added 3 positions this year, half-year positions for principal secretary and building service manager. They have all been filled. Those people are currently doing diligence to get everything organized to set up the school. And what they will be doing from now till the end of the school year is doing all the ordering, going through the final punch-outs for construction on the site, making sure that everything is there. And then they'll be walking through positions. And specifically, we'll be looking for an assistant principal, a secretary, 4 specials teachers, that's for all the arts, a media specialist, a media assistant, a guidance counselor, a pre-K paraeducator, 4 K paraeducators, a portion of an ESOL teacher, a paraeducator to run the in-school intervention center, a nurse, 3 special education teachers, a special education paraeducator, an assistant building service manager, 2 building service workers, food service manager, and 3 service workers, food service workers, for a total of 27.2 positions added to the 3 from the previous year. We're going to be looking at 30 new positions for Duke in the 2016 school year. Now that leaves us with a need for 23 regular education teachers, 2 instructional resource teachers, and then we have to determine what we'll do with the workload for the pupil personnel worker, speech language pathology, and school psychologist. That workload will be shouldered across the current existing staff. That is everything in a nutshell. With that, I would very much like to hand it off to Ms. Tammy McCourt so that she can talk a little bit more in detail.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I see each of you have this lovely binder of lots of detail, so I'll focus predominantly on these 3 bullets. I'd like to direct you initially to Duke Elementary details, which is under tab B, and speak a little bit more in detail about that. We've already covered the positions and the details behind that, but as Mr. Smith indicated, our original request that was submitted to the county as part of the 5-year CIP plan for Duke was the operating cost of about $3.3 million. And we have dropped that number down to $2.2 million. And it is a stretch for us to do so, but we'll need that entire $2.2 million on a recurring basis, whereas the original plan, typically when you open up a school, there are some non-recurring costs that will not be incorporated in the future year's budgets. And the original plan also included 44.2 positions. This plan, of course, includes 30.2 positions, so we do have a bit of a gap there that we'll need to redistribute staff from other areas. So I'd like to walk through that in a little bit more detail. From a mid-level perspective, I'm going to focus on the cost. Mr. Smith's already focused on the positions, so now I'm going to talk about the costs associated with those positions. In the mid-level category, we're recognizing a cost increase of $244,000 associated with the positions for that particular category. For instructional salaries, we'll be recognizing, associated with Duke Elementary, a cost of $466,000. The number that we really needed was $1.1 million, and that was part of the original operating plan for Duke. For textbooks and instructional supplies, we're asking for $457,000. That's for startup costs for setting up the new media center, for the new textbooks, any of the materials of instruction, for new computer software, math licenses, and for new teachers in service training. We'll also be bringing on a nurse and substitute nurse costs for the cost of $53,781,000. For special education, in addition to the positions, the 3 teaching positions, we have a paraeducator, so the cost increase for our special education category of $155,000. For the operations category, we're looking at an increase of $397,000. And that includes not only the positions for the building service manager, assistant building service manager, and building service workers, but also the overtime, the pest control, the refuse management, the upkeep of grounds, equipment repair, contracted substitute building service workers, and all of the custodial supplies, light bulbs, things of that nature that are absolutely needed. But the most expensive cost within operations for Duke Elementary School, of course, is utilities. We need to increase the budget by $135,000 for electricity costs. Going on to the maintenance category, a nominal increase there of $5,597. Fixed charges will be increasing pretty substantially by $391,000 associated with Duke, and that's for the new personnel costs, the health insurance costs associated with new personnel, and Social Security costs. And then we have, under our food services budget, a completely self-sustaining separate budget, a cost of $58,000. So that, in a nutshell, is Duke and the operating costs associated with that. Before I move on to the next priority, do you have any questions regarding Duke?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Having the original plan and then the reduced request helps, but Mr. Smith, talk about why you made these decisions, because pretty much really the change is personnel-wise. If you had an original plan and now you've reduced it, why did you do so?
I mean, ultimately, it's taking a look at the health of the school system and the future funding of the school system, recognizing that if we would have added all of the positions as intended, we're talking about $1 million recurring in the budget that we will have to sustain this year, next year, and further forward on. I do believe that, to be considerate of the the climate, the current revenues that the county has seen coming in, we really can't obligate that much money. At the same time, we have to recognize that we haven't compensated staff. So we need to consider what is the greatest priority. And in my speaking with building level leadership and the association and teachers, what comes up first is compensation. We really want to get back whole. We want to get back on the step that we need to be on. So ultimately, that will mean that we are going to have to be very creative with staff. We are going to have to move positions from other buildings. We're going to have to talk about reductions in this building in supporting services. Anywhere that we can recognize a position and move it over, you know, we've saved the system long-term that obligation of an employee. An employee and the healthcare considerations, you know, we're talking on average, it's every single body that we put in the building, we're using as a placeholder about $65,000. And so we did judiciously take some things out. We do believe that when looking across the system, we can make cuts, we can provide service. So this is the best. This is the most prudent way we can put forward the opening of the school. We never wanted to enter into a conversation about, well, we don't have the funding to open the school, so we're not going to open the school. We're not going to play that game of chicken. It is, we are going to open the school. This is legitimately the amount of money we need to have in a recurring budget to be able to do it, and we will do it by moving staff about.
Thank you.
I noticed there's 0 speech pathologists. Did I see that right? Or
Yes, ma'am.
what are they going to do? Use a paraeducator or have another one like share the school?
We'll be utilizing the existing speech pathologist.
You're what?
We'll be utilizing the existing speech pathologist.
Oh, okay. This is just additions. In
Yes,
other
ma'am.
words, no additions. Okay, that makes sense. I just know how important they are.
Yes.
And let be very clear, we originally built into the budget a speech pathologist and a psychologist and a PPW, because these are very beleaguered employees that, you know, that are expected to provide service to all of our children, 18,000 of them. So this was going to be a way to increase those ranks. We realized that the budget really isn't there for that. So our speech pathologists that we currently have, they're going to have to be picking up all the students who are there. The psychologists will have to be one of the psychologists. Will have an additional school added to their load, and the pupil personnel worker, the exact same case. It'll be added to their load. Is it ideal? No. Is it something that money can fix? Yes. So if there is a way ultimately to have funds, these would be positions that we would certainly be bringing back for your consideration, because they are needed positions across the system.
Thank you.
Mrs. Weaver?
No, I don't have any questions on Duke.
Okay. We're all
Okay.
good?
Moving on to the next budget priority, and that's healthcare costs. We've budgeted an increase of $1 million. If I can direct you, please, to page 63 in your document, talking about this fixed charges. I'll go into a bit of a detail on associated costs for healthcare as well. The total health insurance for employees and retirees as budgeted for 2016 is 28.7%. That represents a 5% increase plus the cost for Duke. So we've already talked about Duke. The associated healthcare costs for Duke are about $315,000. In the period between 2013 and 2016, that represents an $8 million increase, pretty staggering. For this reason, a significant amount of time is constantly being spent in the Department of Finance evaluating both our existing plan, our cost structure, but most especially our internal controls. We've put out an RFP on the pharmaceutical costs. We've just gotten the results of that back. They're being analyzed right now, and we hope to have a proposal back to you, to the board, at your first board meeting in February. With the final evaluation of those proposals, we're hopeful that it will assist in reducing our costs for next year, just in the pharmaceutical area. But this, coupled with our costs year-to-date coming in under projections, I'm hopeful that a 5% increase will be appropriate. However, we have not gotten the formal cost projections from CareFirst yet. We typically don't get those until late February, early March. At this point, they're saying the market trend, and I just got this number late last night, is 9%. When we do get that number, we take into consideration the number of employees, the number of retirees. We have to provide an estimate for the number of retirees that will be continuing on our plan and number of new employees that will be coming onto our plan. It's a very detailed calculation. It's very difficult to estimate. It's extremely complicated. We have to look at the number that are enrolled in our insurance plan, any changes in our insurance plan enrollment from year to year, what the enrollment changes in our HMO plan versus our triple option plan versus our PPO plan. Then we also have to calculate out, in each of those plans, we have different contribution levels. We also have to take into consideration and estimate out the number of people that are on the HMO plan at X percentage contribution from the Board of Education, and how many people on that plan are under the individual plan versus the husband-wife plan versus the family plan, and so on and so forth. So it's a very detailed, intense calculation. And we also have to factor in how much of the money will be funded via our grants fund and our food services fund, and back that out of the calculation to push that over to those appropriate funds. So it's a very complex calculation. We've also factored into the 2016 budget $625,000 to be put aside for the healthcare reserve. In 2015, we did that as well, and that's because when we closed out 2014, we had a fund balance of approximately $400,000 in totality for a $194 million budget. That's not substantial enough.
No, it is not.
We did contract with Bolton Partners this fiscal year to provide for an independent analysis as to how much money we really need to have set aside in a healthcare reserve account. And this fiscal year, we changed back over to the modified retrospective billing, which means that we can also obtain a call from them. So even though CareFirst has estimated our cost to be, let's say, $30 million, they can, if our costs actually exceed that amount, they can request a 5% call. So it's always recommended to have about 2 years worth of 5% monies set aside in our healthcare reserve. The results of that recommendation from Bolton in analyzing our plan and analyzing our liability and analyzing the call was a recommendation to have set aside $4 million. So the way we're going to achieve that $4 million is, as of the end of fiscal year 2014, we had an accrued liability, a 90-day accrued liability already set aside on our books of $2.5 million.
For
This,
healthcare.
I'm sorry?
The accrued liability was specifically for healthcare?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay.
Yes. In 2015, we're adding $625,000 from our budget for the healthcare reserve. We're also have estimated $219,000 employee and retiree contribution to the healthcare reserve in 2015. So that leaves us, as of the end of 2015, $3.3 million of that $4 million liability would be set aside.
That's as of the end of?
2015,
15.
that's the estimate.
Okay.
What is it again?
3.3.
Okay, thank you.
So going into 2016, we still need a little bit more. So we set aside the additional $625,000 with the goal meeting the $4 million liability threshold recommendation by the end of 2016.
So to be really clear and draw a fine point on this, because I know that there have been conversations about last year and where we ended up and what we did with all of this. The current budget that we're in is recommended by, we're going with the CareFirst recommended. We're doing a modified retrospective. The money is encumbered. We have $46.5 million in this budget for fixed charges. In doing that and judiciously watching our money, we are building up our healthcare reserve so that we would have a 2-year 5% call of $4 million. And at the end of this year, because we will have judiciously watched our money, we will have increased our reserve from $2.5 million at the beginning of the year to $3.3 million at the end of the year. And we are planful in this 16 budget to have $4 million by the end of 2016. So as much as we may have found ourselves in kind of vague waters last year, the one thing that I can guarantee is we're doing everything we possibly can to be fiscally prudent and planful with regard to healthcare and fixed charges.
Good.
And I thank Ms. McCourt and Fiscal Services for continuing to monitor this, and look forward to what we have at the end of March, so they can tell us that we're doing a really good job. We're hoping that they're going to come back and they're going to give us great news, that we're doing a very, very, very good job.
I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yes, we all are.
So the question becomes, at the end of 2016, so we've got the 625 in our budget, what do we do now? Should we spend the money on something else and move it somewhere else in our budget? But we still have a healthcare-related obligation, and that's OPEB.
Right.
So the recommendation is then to simply shift it from our healthcare reserve to an OPEB contribution, not in 2016, but in out years. So within the 2016 budget, and within the request from the county is a recurring request of $2 million for OPEB. Our OPEB trust is currently funded at $34 million, but unfortunately, this only represents 17% of the funding amount that we need. So the actuarial accrued benefit needs to be at $146 million. That's our liability. Our annual ARC, or the annual required contribution, is actually $12 million.
So say that again, please. OPEB is.
The liability is $146 million. The amount funded is approximately 17%, or $34 million. We currently have an OPEB trust, investment trust, with many other school districts through MABE. And the ARC, the annual required contribution, is $12 million.
And let's be very clear, we haven't met the ARC ever.
That's correct.
Right.
Right.
And let's also be clear, no other county in the state of Maryland
was my next question.
has even come close
Okay.
to meeting
Correct.
ARC.
If I may, no other school system.
No other school system, yes, no other school system in the county has come close to meeting ARC, and it has fallen in its priority in other systems. We are at 17%, while it gives us great palpitations. Oh my God, I just said palpitations. Gives us great palpitations. We are ahead of other very large school systems that have an almost unfathomable obligation. $146 million is gigantic for us, but consider what it must be for Montgomery, PG, Baltimore City, Howard, Anne Arundel, all of these larger systems.
And we certainly want to recognize within our budget that we have an obligation to not only our current retirees, but our future retirees.
And so the very, actually, Ms. Crowley, so the very last part is, so please understand, we're working with this very $625,000. And in the grand scheme of things, it might not seem like a great deal, but it is to us. So we have dutifully taken our $625,000 this year, and we're putting it towards healthcare. And we've planned next year to take our $625,000 and put it toward healthcare reserve again. And then we're not going to take that money and spend it. We're taking that $625,000 and forever and forever in the future have that be put towards OPEB. And that will be the first time that we as a system have kind of put forth a plan to fund OPEB within our budget. Every year, the money that goes toward OPEB, that's kind of been our relationship and afterthought with our funding agents, where they historically have set aside $2 million and perhaps more from year to year, but it hasn't been something that we have concretely built for and planned for.
And if I may add, because we have that very solid plan that we're crafting, that's part of the reason why it's our recommendation that this be included as part of a recurring funding source from the county government.
Mm-hmm.
One other area within fixed charges budget, since we're on that topic, are pensions. So as you're aware, in 2013, there became a pension shift back to the local jurisdictions. The county government started seeing an increase in their income tax distributions as a result of a shift in the amount that was being held by the state. And the first couple of years, it was funding the pension amount 100%. In 2015, that amount changed. And in fact, in 2016, the amount that you see in the budget is per state law, and it's the last year that's in the law as a dictated amount, a specific amount, and it actually dictates how much the county government will be providing us and then how much we will be billed by the state. So on the expenditure side, what you'll see is an increase to $4.6 million, or an amount of $603,000 increase. However, on the county revenue side, what you'll see to support this expense from the county government is an amount of $4,014,000, about $620,000 short of what the expense is. So theoretically, we're using part of our recurring regular operating dollars to now fund this pension shift. So that concludes the second bullet, healthcare costs and all other related areas within the fixed charges category. Do you have any questions on that particular topic?
Go ahead.
Okay, my question, and I know that we've had this conversation several times, where I knew that the projections was between 7.2, 7.4, and 8.5 percentage projection increase in healthcare costs. And now I know that it's a possibility of 9. How will we adjust things if the,
If it
I know
does come
that-
to 9%.
yeah, if it does come out to 9%?
So there are a couple of things that we need to take into consideration above and beyond just looking at the 9% or 5%. Where are we coming in this fiscal year as compared to budget? And we're doing very, very well. So I'm anticipating that we will have at least a slight savings this fiscal year. So that needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay.
So we need to not only look at budget to budget, but we need to look at actual estimates. And we have 6 months of good numbers so far this fiscal year, and then apply an increase to that number instead of this year's budget number. Okay? And we also need to take into consideration what the effect will be with the RFP that we've put out. And that's still an unknown.
Okay. Thank you.
On that, my understanding is that that MABE will know within, hopefully, the next few days or a week or so, one of the larger systems in the state is looking to utilize this pharmacy benefit that MABE has found and looking to save significant dollars there. So as that comes through and we hear about that and know what they're saving, that should give us a better understanding. At the same time, depending on whether there is savings or not, I would be fearful of taking whatever projected savings are forecast and programming it in anywhere,
and we have
because we've been burned in that in the past.
Right.
So,
Certainly. We need to be very conservative.
yeah,
I like to think of myself as being realistically conservative.
I like that.
I have one question. Is there, within any of the contracts within the employees, is there a healthcare holiday built in, a premium holiday for anything?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Good. Excuse me.
Okay.
In the past, they've never been built in. It has been as an ongoing discussion of if we get money back, if we get a rebate, then which portion belongs to the employees, which portion belongs to the school system, and how do we refund that?
Which is what depleted the reserve the last time.
To a point, yes.
So instead of putting that money into the healthcare reserve, it went out
As a
the way-
holiday,
right,
correct.
The way it's listed in the audit report, that's
Right.
that's how that happened, so.
Mhm.
Okay. I like the plan. I like the, I like the $4 million sitting there. It's very good.
Mhm.
It's what's needed.
Yep.
So, Marilyn, do you have a question
Um,
during there?
Yeah, I'm gonna say something, but I'm not using any names. The county commissioner came up to me and said, I think you have too much money in OPEB. Why don't you give it back to the county? So they do understand how crucial it is, I'm sure. It doesn't matter. We're in charge of our own money, correct?
Yes, but.
I mean, the commissioners give us money,
But they have to
don't tell
approve
us
our
how to
final
spend it.
budget.
That's all I needed to know.
They have to approve our final spending plan.
I'll have an answer for that gentleman. Maybe he's a woman. No. Thank you.
So the final primary bullet is negotiations. We have included an increase of $4 million that's spread across all the categories, taking in consideration all 3 bargaining units. As you recall, we're currently 2 steps behind, and as of July 1st, 2015, for fiscal 2016, our employees would be due a 3rd step. So this takes in consideration that negotiations are currently ongoing. As a side note, the Consumer Price Index reflects an increase of 1.7%. So for our employees to maintain their same level of buying power, essentially we would need to provide a COLA increase of 1.7%. However, COLA increases and cost of living adjustments and step increases certainly just have not been affordable within our budget. Likewise, speaking of maintenance of effort, that's something that's not considered in the base maintenance of effort calculation. Inflationary increases, step increases, the opening of new schools are not taken into consideration in the base maintenance of effort calculation. Any questions? So now I'd like to open it up to any general questions that you may have about the budget in other areas outside of these particular bullet points.
Mrs. Allen, you want to start? And I think this is the way we're going to do it. I've marked up all of the detailed tabs, so we'll start with Mrs. Allen, and then as you go through, everyone else just cross off your questions, if you can, so that way we're not duplicating anything. Is that okay with you?
It is.
Good. Okay.
On page 21 of the, so it's under revenues. I noticed that in the past, we have always budgeted for a line item of rent of facilities and field trips and environmental field trips. This is the first time I've seen those columns zeroed out. Help me understand why.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. I apologize for not pointing that out earlier. So rental of facilities, we felt that it was really important to match up the revenues with the expenses, because as we're renting out the facilities, it should be a one-for-one self-sustaining cost. So we've actually moved all of that over to our revolving fund, and you'll see that within the restricted section of the budget.
Okay.
We're not utilizing any general tax dollars to support the rental of facilities.
Okay.
And the same, I apologize, the same is the case for the field trips as well. These are the additional field trips that are supported by the students.
Okay. And that's what I thought, but I just wasn't certain. On the page 34, and I may have missed this one, the contracted services, the amount had dropped a fair amount for the 15 budget, and even more so for the 16 budget. Help me understand.
I'm sorry, did you say page 34?
34, Office of the Principal. In 2014, our actuals for contracted services was a little more than $133,000. For this year, we've dropped it $88,800, and now we're recommending $36,600. And I think I missed it in the back, so
Yes.
I
think I had that.
And we can come back to that, and I can sit here and look, so.
Right offhand, I can tell you that a portion of that is as a result of a decrease in our reliance on the contracted temp agencies.
Okay.
So the very first page behind the supplemental section I, the very last line, you'll see that the contracted temp agency amount as a component of the contracted services line dropped from $44,000 down to $24,000.
Okay.
It's under tab, letter
I.
You got it, okay.
Yep, I got it. And then I think probably my just last comment, and if Mr. Smith, you want to speak to this, it comes on page 22, the unrestricted fund expenditures, other instructional costs, which is line 5. We for this year's budget, we're at 1.3 million. It's now up to over $2 million. And from my reading of that, you're putting monies back into the classroom. So you're reprogramming them from other places and putting them back into the classroom. I just want to thank you, because that was, I mean, that comes down to materials of instruction. That's something we've heard about over and over again. And so I want to thank you for putting those monies back, but I'll give you the chance to comment on that one.
Putting them in the right places, and also, do you have where's the breakdown of that? It's under,
That would be under tab N.
yeah.
And a portion of this is also, as Mr. Smith stated, it's reallocating costs to be represented within the correct categories as well. So what we've done is we've reallocated the technology leasing cost from mid-level into the other instructional cost to reflect it exactly where it needs to be.
Right. And I mean, most of my other questions, as I was going through them the other night, I was able to find them in the back. It's a function of, I see that you've, rather than picking up a new assistant principal for Duke, you are moving someone, moving a position, which is understandable when we've got larger sized classes, other places,
Right.
or a larger student population other places. As you downsize that, you know, there's an adjustment potentially. And you've said you're moving in where you can move teachers with students.
Right.
That's what's going to happen. Is that you are also, a lot of what I saw was because you've moved IT
Information technology
Out.
services, right, under.
from one side of the house to the other,
Oversight.
and those dollars followed,
And
so,
those people followed, and
Right.
those salary lines followed as well.
which, you know, explains the jump in operations. So I really think I'm good.
We've also, keep in mind that also within this budget, we didn't have two very important programs. Apex wasn't budgeted for, and that, of course, is our primary delivery online coursework for kids to recover credit, to earn original credit, and it runs in all three of our schools, and that's going to be one of the primary reasons when I bring forward at the next board meeting our graduation rate for 2014. Apex. And it carries an expensive, it's quite a cost. It had been provided to us through a grant. The grant went away. We didn't build the money for it in the 15 budget, so we have to build it into the 16 budget. Now, we've moved money all over to keep Apex this year. Performance matters. We've entered into that's a $100,000 plus program, and that is really what drives all of the assessment data across the system to be able to track how students are doing outside of state level testing, which we're going to have quite a window before we have any meaningful data back from that. So those two programs, about $250,000 worth of technology, wasn't built into this 2015 budget. It is explicitly built into the 2016 budget, and it's exceptionally important. I can't say enough for Performance Matters and the president of the company. When we said we were in the fiscal position we were in, we're not carrying a cost for that this year. Because we had been with them for so long, we had a great relationship. That cost has been deferred to this year and the next year. So those are two things that are explicitly built into the budget as well.
And if I may add to that, if you look under your section N, the second to last page, you'll see the detail of that within this document. The Apex and the exact cost of that, Performance Matters and the exact cost of that. We've gone line by line and worked with the directors to obtain this information in great detail so that we can make sure that it's extremely transparent to you as you're analyzing your budget.
And that's really just my last comment is you've made it possible by the way the budget has been presented this time, by the way it's all laid out, for me to see it in one place and then go search for the details. And so I've got the executive summary end of things and then the detail portion, and I can keep going back to that. And I cannot thank you enough for that. And I think that's a big part of why I just don't have a lot of questions, because I'm able to find the information for myself. And when I'm able to do that, it's a lot more meaningful to me because I retain it. So, thank you.
And many thanks to the directors as well.
Yeah. I know this is a much different level of detail than has necessarily been presented before, but it's also a lot easier for me to explain things to community members, to commissioners, when I have this kind of information, and to be able to just pull it out and say, okay, no, here it is, let's look. So, thank you. That's it.
Mrs. Washington?
I only have one question, and I want to thank you for the budget. It's clear, it's transparent, and it's meaningful. But back at the Board of Education meeting in April 2014, several items were mentioned as to why we had the $6 million budget debacle. And they were utilities, weather-related costs, healthcare, special education contracted therapists. You explained and answered my questions about the health care, how we're going to deal with that to prevent those shortfalls. Can you explain and direct us to the tab in the budget book, how we will address these issues of utilities, weather-related costs, and special education contracted therapists so we can prevent another budget shortfall in the future?
Sure. So the operational plan houses the utility budget, and that's under tab S. And you'll see in here the details and the level of analysis that Mrs. Howell goes through to provide for a very detailed analytical approach to budgeting the utility costs. And we did, in fact, increase utilities, especially for heat, by 6.2% increase on the base. Plus, we added an amount of $72,000 for Duke. Under utilities, electricity, we increased that by 3.8%. And what she's doing is analyzing the rates. She's going out and having conversations with vendors and analyzing the usage and the volume. So for electricity, we factored in a 3.8% increase plus added $135,000 for Duke. For utility, she actually maintained the existing rates, but she's been in constant contact with Metcom, monitoring what their proposals are going to be, and there's been no final decision in that. But that's something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward as well. And then I think you had a question about special education, specifically contracted therapists.
Yes.
So let me add to that, there's also the out-of-county placements. We bumped that line up by a couple $100,000 because our usage in placements out of county based on IEPs and 504 plans have driven that need to increase. So we've actually taken a snapshot today as to how many out of placements we have and exactly what today's costs are, and factor that into next year's budget. With respect to contracted therapists, what you'll see is that oftentimes we have to contract for therapists if we cannot bring on the qualified staff. So we've budgeted for the FTE, so sometimes we have to do a budget adjustment, move that money from the position over to the contracted therapist, but we've budgeted in one place or the other.
Okay, I think it was important for the citizens to understand that we have taken steps to ensure that what happened last budget cycle won't happen this cycle, and it makes it clear to everybody the steps we have taken.
That was an excellent question. Thank you for asking. The other thing that we've done is, while working with each of the directors, and what you see in your budget binder in the supplemental detail is the analysis, the multi-year analysis. So we not only said, okay, well, this is how much money we had in last year's budget, let's just plop that down here. We've looked at the actual cost for 2013, actual cost for 2014, and actual cost year to date.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Once again, I'm just going to reiterate, this is the type of budget document that should be coming out of any type of organization that has $195 million plus running through it. Mm-hmm. So my hats are off to you and your staff, because I know it was a tremendous amount of work. And I have very minimal questions, mainly because, as Kathy had mentioned, whatever's in the executive summary, which I kind of glossed over and I went straight to the details, because that has all the variance analysis. And I know I brought this up last week at the board meeting, but and I don't know if all of this detail is available on the website,
We have not released that yet.
but what we have here is for every big account category that she has up there, there's a detailed variance analysis. So any change that fluctuates,
Is documented.
it is documented, in addition to all of your estimates, and I guess processes to go through in order to even arrive at that budgeted number. So I know it was a tremendous amount of work, and I also appreciate the fact that you've aligned everything more, accounting-wise, matching up revenues and expenses, which should have always been done. But I think for some of the variances that we do see in here, that is the explanation, just because now everything matches the way that it really should have in the first place. So,
And I think Mrs. McCord said earlier that this level of documentation has always been available in finance. It just has never been provided to the board. And so I'm just glad you're now providing it to the board, because it makes it a lot easier for us.
right. So a couple questions on a couple of, like the attorney fees and the estimates for that. Are those just based on past history for expenses, or how did you come up with some of those numbers? I think like banking services, attorney fees.
Banking services in particular, we're looking at past history and year-to-date as
Okay.
well. For attorney fees, we actually have a contract with that,
Okay.
so we're taking into consideration both the contract and past history and kind of trying to merge them together.
Okay. Under the IT tech services, and it's just a general question, there's nothing specific, but we did bring up at the last board meeting what the cost would be if we needed to have some type of disaster recovery plan.
Yes.
And I know that's not built in here
No.
anywhere. So I would just like for knowledge what we think that number might be.
Right.
I don't need it today, but just so, if we do come to a point where we're like, this is something we really need to do, we have a cost estimate, which I'm sure is somewhere in this
Yes.
building already. Let's see. I think those were, like I said, I went through a lot. I did appreciate the fact under instructional salaries that the annual leave payoff number is now 0. I think that was a good plan. The substitute teachers, though, that budget item did jump up, and the memo item, I'm under tab L for everyone. But the memo item only had about 15,000 for Duke. I wasn't sure what the difference was between this year and last year, or next year, excuse me.
Our costs are actually, increasing
Okay.
for substitutes.
Okay.
So once again, we were looking at last year's actual costs, our year-to-date projections, and projecting
Okay.
that out.
Okay, because it kind of fluctuated. 14, it was 663. Then, if I'm looking at the right line item.
You are.
It's
uh,
budgeted at
Down to
3.
Right, then down to 342,
Budgeted
and
at
now it's jumped back
342.
up again.
And I believe our actuals will be well over $500,000 for
That's correct.
substitutes.
Okay.
Just because that number was put in is certainly not the number that we're actually working with, which is the challenge of this year's budget.
Right. Let's see. Sorry. I think those might be it. There's, like I said, it's a tremendous job. The detail on, the contracted services for the bus contractors, it's all laid out in this document. The way it's presented, it leads to very few questions. So I don't want to give anyone the impression that, anything is being glossed over, because
Right.
it's not. It is all in these details. I can sit here and add up everything and get to the exact number that they have punched in for the fiscal year 16 budget request.
Mrs. McCord is smiling.
I know.
The one thing we said was that whatever we present, the numbers have to add up.
I have my calculator right here.
All the different places.
And
Does
what did I
everyone
say?
see it?
And in the event that it doesn't, you need to notify us, because that was one of our first priorities.
That's right. Under tab S for operational plans, I know the expectation was for the volunteer training that right now is done on paper, that eventually that was going to move to some type of computer-based for the volunteers that are within the school system. I didn't see that was in here anywhere. Is that a something that is
Yeah, that's
going
a-
forward? Is that something that's on hold?
I would have to come back with you on that.
Okay, okay.
I have to come back with you on that.
I will star that. I think that's it. Those were the, you know, there was excellent job, so. Rita, any other-
Okay, I also like to reiterate, a great job that I could go back and forth, and so most of my questions were already answered. Thank you for the side notes, because that explained a lot. People don't know, there was, in our portion, there's a lot of little side notes to explain why something went up or down, where an FTE went, things like that. Okay, so my questions are on transportation, and,
Tab, what tab?
oh, I'm sorry, under tab.
R.
R. So for transportation, maybe it was in there and I missed it, for the students for Duke, for the new school. I did not see an added contract or added, you know, under the FTE or anything for another driver. Will most of those students now be walking, you know, from that one neighborhood, from the immediate neighborhood? And I know we had talked in the past about the cost for gas and things like that, an estimate, but I did not see that broken down. And let's see, that was it.
And we have Mr. Jeff Thompson, the Director of Transportation. We sent him a quick wire this morning and said, please join us.
Well, good morning. For Duke, well, basically, we service every part of the county as it is now. So what's going to happen when Duke comes aboard next year is those buses that are currently servicing it for, whether it be the Leonardtown District or Hollywood District, they're already in the budget. We're paying for those drivers and those buses already in the budget. So
Okay.
basically, we're just shifting those over to the new school. So we're using our existing, you know, drivers and buses and everything we have to provide the service to the new school for Duke. So it's already in there.
Already there in place. What about the expense for the cost, estimate cost for gas?
for diesel fuel.
Yeah.
For the contractors, the contracted buses, which are all of our regular ed buses and about half of our special needs bus fleet, we run about 3.7 million miles, and so we're budgeting that at $3.50 for next year.
And in the past couple of years, we've budgeted at $4 a gallon.
At $4, yes.
Because of the cost of diesel.
Yes.
To reflect the cost.
What page is it at?
It's on, right here, it's 350, and this whole
Okay,
explanation.
I'm
is
sorry,
right.
I looked through it and I had.
But that's not,
This
yeah.
whole thing here, this is what I was talking about, the whole contracted services, if you add all of this up, it comes
Yep.
up to what their
Okay.
thing is, and all the estimates that they use in the calculations. Will all
Okay.
foot you to that number.
Okay. All right, those were my questions. Thank you very much for that.
Do you have anything else?
I have two other
Okay.
areas. The operation of plant, which is under
Yes.
S,
S.
S and T.
Okay. This. Okay, so I know that for the contracted areas, I know that there's areas where, let me see if I can find it. I know it's like for the, some of the areas that, for maintenance and upkeep, oh, here we go. The inspections, burglar alarm, clocks, kitchen hood inspections, sprinkler systems, et cetera, for expenditures, for contracted service. There's another area where it said contracted services, it said 0. Now, is there an area maybe that I'm missing that has for, if something happens that's not under a, I guess you would say, that a maintenance,
Maintenance agreement.
yeah, a maintenance agreement that could be shifted, such as, let's say, if somebody puts their phone down the toilet and you can't get it out with a snake. That was my example. Okay.
You should quit doing that.
Okay,
And-
wait, so is this your question? So you
So
wanna
this is
know-
my question. So if something like that happens, where is the money going to be shifted from because you might have to go to an outside area to get that service completed.
And we
Those,
have Mr.
those
Steve-
types of services, plumbing services in particular, are budgeted in maintenance of plant, which is a different section within the budget.
That's under T.
Okay, but in general, those type of things come up all the time, whether it be a cell phone or trash, and particularly a sewage system, but a frozen pipe underneath the ground, or we have a lot of instances that come up every year. And inside the Department of Maintenance and Operations, to some level, we manage that within our budget. And we have projects that we plan to do that need to get shifted or need to be deferred to a following year if they're major.
Okay.
If they're extremely burdensome on the budget, sometimes Mr. Clemens might be able to answer a little more detail, but we have the ability to make an emergency request to the county. But those
Okay.
are, I think in the past 8 years, I know of one. I don't know if that's accurate, but I think 1 in 8 years is about what we've had. But actually, unforeseen things like that can be budgeted to some level, because there is a consistent amount of that each year.
Okay.
Play.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. The next one is the snow removal, because I know that was a big, one of the things going back to Mary's statement. And on here, it has snow removal, 0, contracted services.
And this is Mr. Whidden, who
Mr. Steve Whidden, the Director of Maintenance, just a fantastic gentleman.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, snow removal is not something that's budgeted for because we really can't forecast exactly how much we're going to need in that area. So it's
She said
something that's
forecast.
embedded within the operations budget, and we'll need to monitor the costs and redistribute the operations budget as needed.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's also what the county does. The county does not budget for snow removal.
I didn't know if, like, in the past, you just put a flat, let's say a flat amount, let's say 100,000, or, something like that, that you'd automatically, and then if it wasn't used, then
No.
you just rolled it over to the following year. No, okay. Next area is the special ed, which is,
Thank you. I don't have memorized.
why not?
I know.
You had all last night. All right, good morning.
Good morning.
For under
Bless you.
contracted services, the professional development, it now has 0. I know the one year it had 7,721, and last year it had 0, and this year 0. What my question to you is, if there is a student with a specific special needs that the staff needs to be trained on from an outside resource, where would you move the money from in order to have this contracted service?
I'm trying to think of an instance. The staff that we have are highly qualified and highly trained. We do our own staff development within the department upstairs to make sure that we are current on best practices and the most recent innovations that are current. And so if we would have an instance where a student came in, we have been able to meet those needs in the time that I've been here.
Okay.
So.
All right.
And also, some of the professional development and the training that staff receive, I mean, we look very creatively to grants and to one-time funds that are available in a variety of situations. So, for example, the professional development day that we had just last Friday, we did have presenters come down. We used presenters within the county itself, and we accessed grant funds to do some other things. So, we haven't had we had $7,000 set aside specifically for professional development, but we haven't done that for the last 3 years.
Well, I also have, as part of the federal money, the pass-through money,
Right.
there is a specific amount allocated each year. It varies from year to year The state is now calling it local flexibility funding. And those are identifying under the 21 indicators that we have. MSDE identifies areas in which either local governments or the state is not meeting an indicator. Okay. And funds will be targeted in that area. And then the state provides, we have a 3-day leadership conference every year that the state provides, which is, again, identifying things that we're seeing, national trends, how those relate to state trends. And we have a very intensive state development, staff development during those days where they're creating trainers of trainers.
Okay.
We're fortunate in St. Mary's that because we're also the lead agency for infants and toddlers, we can take up to 8 to 9 people to that state conference where national speakers are brought in. We've presented, St. Mary's has presented. Usually there's a day where we do peer-to-peer presentations. And we've been held up as a model for infants and toddlers. This year we presented at that conference for our transition program for our older adult students.
All right, thank you. The one last question I have is for the attorney fees that I see it's $25,000, and it was last year, and the year before it was a little bit lower. Now, do the attorney fees, is this for representation for IEP hearings, due process, and also does that include, let's say if you had a question and needed to consult with the attorney, you know, about a question of a new law or something that was coming up, does that include all of that, or is that fall under a separate area?
No. The $25,000 is allocated primarily for when the SMCPS needs representation at an IEP meeting. The only time we ever have representation is if a family brings it. We've had 2 formal mediations last year and 1 potential due process, which was withdrawn. So whether or not the families have representation for a due process hearing, we always do. If I have any questions about legal questions, my first resource is the State Department. I ask for clarification and guidance on that. If it's related to a specific case, I am very, very judicious about using the time when Mr. O'Mealy or Mr. Brookhauser are here. So that doesn't incur any additional, that just goes on our contract.
All right.
So any other conversations I would have with an attorney would be related to a specific case.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Those are all my questions.
Now, you asked some good questions, ladies. I went through the budget and mainly picked out things that stuck out at me. Like I asked about the speech pathologist, but I got a good answer for that one. And I noticed the Apex, but you answered that question that we're going to have it.
No,
it is
absolutely.
there. It's already there.
Yeah.
You're just drawing from other areas.
Right.
And performance matters. We have that. The park test. When I was going to the I still am, well, I don't know if I'm on it. Well, I guess I'm on it if I want to be, the legislative body that goes to MAID. That we had a gentleman in from the current governor's office. No, he's not the current governor, is he? Wednesday, he kind of lost his job, I guess. Anyway, and the gentleman that he had came in said, and I think I've said this before, we don't want the technology used just to take those tests for park. We want that technology used for other things. But I don't know. Can you speak to that at all?
So with Race to the Top funds, the $3 billion that went across the states and to all the school systems, we received 1.4, which ultimately went up to $1.6 million that we exhausted 2 years ago. That money barely covered the conversation about Race to the Top, the inclusion of all the evaluation elements that were supposed to be put into it. We used that money to finish fiber to each one of our elementary schools so that each one of the elementary schools actually had the capacity to be able to get on the internet. And that was it. You know, Park comes with nothing but expectation. There have, you know, we've been asked several times to estimate what Park will really cost us as a system. There's going to be a dollar cost, and then there's going to be a human capital cost. We're going to see in the next, we've done infrastructure trials this week. We're one of the one county in the state of Maryland that's taken advantage of an opportunity to do some infrastructure trial work with Park. We've done it for the last 3 days, and we've been, I'm going to modestly say we've been really, really challenged. Not only with the product itself, the actual getting on to the TestNav site that's released through Pearson, but then with our own infrastructure, our own computers, as you well know, and we've lamented several times, we were not within this budget cycle able to purchase the computer lease for the elementary schools. So the elementary schools have, and as you may all attest, very outdated equipment, and so it requires a great deal of time and effort on behalf of our IT department to go out, to run all the critical updates, to make sure that the machines that are there are operating to their maximum capacity to be able to access it. What will Park cost us? I have no idea. It is not in this budget. I mean, it's millions upon millions upon millions of dollars in computer technology, infrastructure to be able to connect to the internet, and that's before we even get to the test itself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I remember when Bob Kelly was here. And
The good Sir Kelly.
I'm just an old lady, guys, and he was complaining about the wiring we did and talking about the fiber and all that, and he said, you just did it wrong, Marilyn, you did it wrong, but we did it wrong. Speech pathologist, you've answered that question. That's it. Thank you. You've done a terrific job. Now as we needed some more money.
There is, once again, I've been quoted, there is nothing that money can't fix. There's nothing within the school system that money can't fix. We have incredibly talented people, and we can certainly recruit more incredibly talented people if we just have the money to employ their great skills and then the time and money to buy the things that they need to do the job. So, you know, this has been, I'd just like to conclude by praising, again, Ms. McCourt, all of the directors, Mr. Clements, you know, as a deputy superintendent, the amount of time that goes into building a budget and really talking about money and having really hard conversations. Because it's a this for that. There's only so much. I spoke yesterday to ESMIC representatives, teachers from across the system, and scooped with Scott where we had ice cream. What a joy! And they said, you know, what are you going to do about class size? What are you going to do about? And it's really hard to say. You know, the money just isn't there. We have to make very informed and considerate decisions. And I really have to praise everybody this year for putting together something where I think this is a real best effort. And I look forward to the day when the headline of the enterprise reads SMCPS fully funded, and we move into a fantastic 2016 and following subsequent years with a great relationship. So thank you very much for the work. Thank you very much for your attention.
I have one more comment. I think
Sure.
the other thing that is present in here and, well, or in the discussions that everyone has had is I think that there is a lot of forward thinking about what is going to, you know, what needs to happen next year and the year after.
Right.
And I can't say, once again, sitting on the outside, that I had ever seen or heard that before. So I'm very happy to know that does occur, whether it's new this year or not. I don't know. I don't want to know. But, you know, at least there is a, you know, everyone's looking forward to, you know, to what we need to build for next year and the year after. So,
And the implications and sustainability of what we do put in.
right.
We all plan on being here for a very long time. Big head nods from everybody, yes. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's
Oh,
everything. If we
yeah,
have any
we
more
do
questions.
intend to be here a long time. You're
So,
right.
So you need
okay,
a motion.
thank you. I need a motion to adjourn the session, please.
Actually, you
Motion
need
to
a
adjourn.
motion,
Oh, what do I need?
you need a motion to enter into executive session.
Oh, I need a motion,
and then to
that's
adjourn.
right. I need a motion to enter into executive session.
So I move the board enter into executive session to discuss personnel under Maryland Local Government Code, Article Section 9-512A1.
I need a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you.